Hello, this is Alex from the stadium in Bay City, Michigan, and today we are looking at the budget version of Temmet Eldrazi for Commander. If you are looking for the non-budget video, please click on the link in the description, as you'll be able to find it there, since they don't let me put annotations anymore, so I can't make it easy, I'm sorry. Okay, on to the good stuff. Temmet Vizier of Natkamun is a 2/2 human cleric for a blue and a white. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature token you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. This ability is the core that our deck is built around. The game plan is to make some big scary Eldrazi, then make a token copy of one and use Temmet's trigger to push it through for guaranteed unblockable damage. While the non-budget version of the deck is looking to push through with just a few enormous Eldrazi, we're going slightly more wide with the budget version, making it more of a true tribal deck. We still have big Eldrazi, but they're not $20 Titans. The rest of Temmet is that he can embalm, making himself very efficient. People are going to want to keep him off the table because of the danger his synergy represents, so reducing the amount of times you'll have to recast him from your command zone by about half will potentially save you a lot of mana in the long run. Plus, when he's a token, he can make himself bigger and unblockable, although in the budget version, we're not really playing much to pump him. So, here's some of our scary Eldrazi. Kozilek the Great Distortion is great for a lot of reasons. He fills our hand back up, which is really important as a budget deck, because we sometimes struggle to get as much value as we should otherwise like out of our cards. But he also hits like a truck with evasion and can counter a lot of spells. Oblivion Sower is a slightly smaller body than most big Eldrazi, but he can get us a lot of utility because, as you'll later see, we have a decent amount of ingest and other exile shenanigans in this budget list. Pathrazer of Ulamog is something we really want to make token copies of. It's got Annihilator 3, it's large, and it's really hard to block even without Temmet's Unblockable. Desolation Twin is enormous, and he makes a token copy of himself to boot, so he's a natural fit into the deck. Void Winnower deals with a lot of problem cards like Wrath of God, but also is just a general pain in the butt for our opponents, while simultaneously being a very large threat. Hand of Emrakul has Annihilator 1, so it can be an annoying attacker, but what's great is that in the right hands you can cast him very early on with Eldrazi spawns. Don't count on that happening super often though, since our access in blue-white is somewhat limited to the spawns, where we would have a lot more access in green. Artisan of Kozilek is one of the best creatures in the deck because it has Annihilator 2 and reanimates a guy when cast. He's really large, so Temmet likes him a lot. And Ulamog's Crusher is also just a large Annihilator creature, but he does have to attack each turn if able, so be careful. Deceiver of Form is great here because we go much wider in this version of the deck, so if you reveal a Pathrazer of Ulamog or anything else really big, you can do a lot of damage. Plus, if you make a token copy of Deceiver of Form, you do get multiple chances each combat to hit to hit something enormous with his reveal trigger. Conduit of Ruin ramps us and lets us search for any of the large Eldrazi we're looking for, so he's obviously pretty important. Like I said, we do have some ingest shenanigans going on, so that means we have some processors as well. Ulamog's Despoiler can just be a nice 9/9 for 6. If you're in need of a big creature to push through with Temmet, unless there's a lot of exiled cards, it might actually be best to not process with the Despoiler until you make a token copy of it. So then Temmet has the 9/9 to work with. Ulamog's Reclaimer is useful as an on-theme way to get back some of our key instants and sorceries, but also being a colorless card, it does interact well with some of our other cards. So that gives it a slight advantage over some other things like maybe Archaeomancer. Blightherder can ramp us fairly well, while making more bodies for when we need to go really wide. Unfortunately, this one's the cast trigger, so you won't be able to abuse making token copies of the card to get the scions. Bane of Balaged is a great creature because it hits hard and has essentially better Annihilator. It's arguably our best creature to reveal with Deceiver form, because we get to just exile everything, and it's decently sized. Thought Harvester is one of the cards I talked about that cares about our stuff being colorless, and it can generate a lot of exile over time for us to work with. Ruination Guide is another card that cares about our stuff being colorless. It has Ingest, which is important in this deck, and it also makes all of our stuff hit harder, including spawns and scions. Benthic Infiltrator is a pretty guaranteed way to ingest someone, so that's pretty useful. If our board is really wide and we reveal this with Deceiver form, we could potentially mill someone. Mist Intruder is a cheap ingest creature with evasion, so it's also useful. Dimensional Infiltrator is really cool because it's repeatable exile while being able to flash it in. Eldrazi Devastator is another big dumb Eldrazi. The trample doesn't matter if you're going to push through with Temmet, but it's still good to have. Breaker of Armies is, yet again, a big dumb Eldrazi. What's cool about him is that since we're going so wide with the deck, his lure effect is really good. So if we make a token copy of him, while we're not going to want to make him unblockable if we want the lure, he still hits for 11 with Temmet's ability, so he's not a bad target. However, the problem with lures is often the creature luring just dies. So if we can use a repeatable source of token production, like Followed Footsteps, we can lure every turn. Endbringer is pretty awesome because it untaps every turn and has a high amount of utility. If we can make a lot of copies of it, then the ping ability can actually clear boards and end games pretty quickly. Deep Fathom Skulker is just a nice way to draw cards in a creature-based deck while also catering to our creatures. Temmet obviously can make a token unblockable, but he only does it to one token per combat. We might have a lot of big creatures, so the Deep Fathom Skulker can help us with connecting with more creatures than one per turn if it's a problem. Extricator of Sin helps with our wide strategy, and its transformed side, Extricator of Flesh, gives our creatures a lot of utility, but we don't have many non-Eldrazi creatures for it to sacrifice, unfortunately. The card is actually better in the budget version than it is in the non-budget version, because we're making a lot more scions and spawns. Tide Drifter is another card that makes colorless creatures matter. It's a decent blocker, and it makes our other creatures more resilient. Curious Homunculus is sort of a form of ramp. If we have a big spell we want to cast, but we're not drawing our other ramp, we can even make copies of them, so that's pretty useful to ensure consistency. So now we're on to our various effects that copy our scary Eldrazi so Temmet can let them smash. First, we have Vizier of Many Faces, which on the surface is a clone, but what makes it special is that it has Embalm, so if they kill it, we can clone something else later and push that copy through with Temmet. You'll also notice that a lot of the token copy effects say, of target creature you control. Vizier here does not, so if an opponent has something scarier or otherwise more useful, we can take that too. Cackling Counterpart is an instant speed copy effect that you can flash back. It's one of our cheapest options mana-wise. Faded Infatuation is also an instant 3 converted mana cost source for this, but it's triple blue, so it sometimes is difficult to work with. Being able to scry 2 with it is pretty useful though. Rite of Replication is one of the staple cards for blue and Commander as a whole, and it can allow us to make 5 copies of something, even our opponent's creatures, so it can be pretty backbreaking at times. Tempt with Reflections is great because we can potentially get a lot of copies, and only ours will wind up unblockable with Temmet. Plus, we have a lot of other great creatures, so we're not afraid of their creatures scaling over ours. Saheeli's Artistry is a pretty flexible spell because we can continue to ramp by copying a mana rock or get some other awesome stuff from our opponents, in addition to copying something for Temmet to push through. If we return it to our hand with Ulamog's Reclaimer, we can even copy the same creature twice because the initial copy will be an artifact. Stolen Identity is nice and repeatable, and we're often wanting to do so since our creatures usually like to attack. If we cipher it onto the copy, we can keep pumping it through by being unblockable too, so we can more easily build an army. Clone Legion allows us to make a copy of our entire board, which is really awesome in this deck since there's so few legendary creatures in the budget version, and we're pretty happy with going wide. What's also great about it is we can copy our opponent's board, which at the very least tends to deter an attack into us from a scary board presence of another player. Minion Reflector lets us make copies of each of our creatures as they come into play. It's sort of creating pseudo haste and lets us land hits with Temmet from an otherwise empty board. Dance of Many is probably the worst card in the deck. This card it's not a good card. Just so you know, the Oracle text of the card, since it is different from any actual printing of the card, it reads, when Dance of Many enters the battlefield, create a token that's a copy of target non-token creature. When Dance of Many leaves the battlefield, exile the token. When the token leaves the battlefield, sacrifice Dance of Many. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Dance of Many unless you pay double blue. So basically, it's something that can potentially eat up our mana, but it also was a cheap copy effect to get on the board, even if we have to keep paying mana into it until the creature's gone. Budget decks have to play weird cards somewhere, right? Followed Footsteps is one of my favorite cards, not just in this deck, but in general. You can grab your opponent's best creature, or you can just make an army of yours. If you put on something that has an abusable enter the battlefield effect, it can be incredible. I remember when I had my Riku of Two Reflections deck built, one of my favorite things was to put this on a Thragtusk or an Avenger of Zendikar, because those cards were super great when you got to get them every single turn. While those cards are obviously not in this deck, they might be in someone else's, so we could still hold out for it. As for Back from the Brink, it's a lot of mana to get any benefit for this deck, but it lets your big threats be far more resilient, and it actually works a little better with Temmet, since you can pay white-blue instead of the embalm cost. On to Ramp, Soul Ring is one of the most essential cards in the format, and thanks to its absurd amount of printings, we can justify its price for the budget deck. Azorius Signet is also a great mana rock, and has just become even more affordable thanks to Modern Masters. Mind Stone is great because it's a mana rock that will give us colorless mana for our Eldrazi that care, while also having the additional utility to draw a card with it later in the game. Hedron Archive is obviously two Mind Stones stapled together, but also has the added benefit of being a huge flavor win. Commander Sphere is also nice for its added utility later in the game, by being able to sacrifice it to draw a card. Cryptolith Rite is in here for a handful of reasons. For one, it's a mana rock, and we sure do love some mana rocks. Two, it's an absolute flavor win for Eldrazi, even if we're not playing Emrakul in this version of the deck. 3, it's John Avon, and I'm sucker for his art. I get to use my foil copy. Finally, in some scenarios, it can straight up kill people, not only with the gradual drain of its front ability, but also with the creature, of course, Aurora of Emrakul. It's awesome for finishing off opponents, but it also hits everyone. What also makes it great is that it has Death Touch. If we can transform into this, then start making copy effects, people die very quickly. Plus, it's an absolute flavor win because not only does it have the Eldrazi creature type, it has Reflection, which is basically what the deck is actually doing. We're making reflections of Eldrazi. Moving on, I'm a sucker for the Dragonlord monuments in budget lists because they're very flexible later in the game. I've won a number of games with some of my budget 3-color decks by animating multiple monuments every turn to finish off an opponent. Skittering Invasion is great because of flavor reasons, but it also can ramp pretty hard and make a large amount of creatures for when going wide becomes our plan. Dreamscape Artist is a very unique card in blue because it ramps actual lands. It's worth noting they enter untapped, so if you're flooded on blue, you can get the white you need and vice versa. For some removal, we have Swords of Plowshares, or Swords to Plowshares, excuse me. It's possibly the best spot removal for creatures in the whole format, and thanks to Wizards' tendency to reprint this card lately, it's become quite affordable. Banishing Light is a flexible removal spell for pretty cheap. Imprisoned in the Moon is one of the best answers to problem commanders in our colors because it essentially removes them from the equation, while not giving the option to go back to the command zone. Also, it's an enormous flavor win. Oblivion Ring is just like Banishing Light, but if you can find a way to blink it or destroy it in response to the trigger, it exiles the target forever. Cyclonic Rift is still, in my opinion, the actual best card in the format. And if you're playing blue, but not playing this card, your deck is probably lacking. Modern Masters did help the price of the card quite a bit. If you're unfamiliar with the card, it's important to remember that it's an instant, so you can cast it during the end step before your turn, or during combat before damage if needed. Fumigate is just a good board wipe for us for a couple of reasons. First, even though we are a heavy creature-based deck, we still need board wipes, just in case our opponents are doing something scarier than us, or if we stumble a little too much. Second, if we do have a strong board presence, but someone else has a better one, we'll likely gain a lot of life from the Fumigate. Here we have some of our other utility cards in the deck. Scion of Vizier is in here because of its populate effect, and at the very least generates a couple of birds with it. Rootborn Defenses lets us populate our best token while also saving us from board wipes. Ponder is a great cantrip because it essentially allows you to look at 4 cards, while also shuffling away the ones you don't want if needed. Coax from the Blind Eternities is a pretty cool card. While I don't play with a Wish sideboard, if your playgroup does, this may become even better. As it is, if someone exiles one of our threats, as people are often wanting to do, we can certainly bring it back with this. Arcane Denial is a great counterspell for our deck because we're essentially a combo deck. Less so than the non-budget version, but we still have a lot of those interactions with our own cards. It's good because we're a combo deck since it replaces itself, even if it lets our opponent draw 2 cards. In some ways, letting them draw a couple of cards could be a boon for us, since it's more political. They might not be upset with us for countering their important spells, since we let them draw 2 more. Counterspell is just good, so that's why it's in there. I mean, the double blue might not be super consistent early game, but we'll have no problem with it as we move to the mid to late game. Negate is great for us, because a lot of our creatures should just be better than our opponents, so that means a lot of the problem cards against our deck will be non-creatures. Dawn Charm is loaded with utility, often reserved for outside of its colors. You'll probably catch a lot of people by surprise with this card. Ojutai's Command is a nice counterspell in the event that someone does play a scary creature, which for us will usually be one that enables a combo of some sort. As for the other modes, draw a card is always useful. Gain 4 life is marginal in Commander, but it's not irrelevant either. We do have 6 creatures with converted mana cost 2 or less in our deck, counting the Commander, so there are targets for that mode as well. Now we're on to lands. For our lands, it's worth noting that they're going to be pretty slow. It's always one of the biggest sacrifices in a budget deck. Calciform Pools and Mage Ring Network are our storage lands in the deck, so if you need a little help ramping, or you're not hitting your land drops, or you're not curving out, they can help you stabilize and be a bit more consistent. It's also worth noting that they do tap for colorless, for Eldrazi that care. Vizier, Refuge, and Tranquil Cove are nice because they provide both of our colors, while also providing some very slight utility in their life gain. Blasted Landscape, Lonely Sandbar, and Secluded Steppe are all very cheap, while having the added benefit of not being dead draws later in the game. Blasted Landscapes is there because we have a number of cards that are actually caring about colorless mana, so we really want to make sure we have enough of it. The Panoramas are there for the same reason. They produce colorless mana, but if we need to fix our colors better, they do allow us to do so. The rest of these are basically just other lands that produce our colors. Azorius Chancery has the added benefit of being able to bounce a cycling land so we can draw a card off it. Meandering River and Azorius Guildgate just enter tapped, but tap for our colors. Command Tower is, well, Command Tower. And then we've got basics. So, that's the deck. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you want to compare it to the non-budget version, you can follow the link in the description. If you have any comments or questions, the best way to reach out to me about this would probably be Twitter. So tweet at ExoTheMage, ExoTheMage. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you next time.